It was a quiet evening at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, a place known for its elegance, marble floors that gleamed under golden chandeliers, and staff who prided themselves on providing impeccable service. In the midst of this calm, a scene began to unfold that would soon capture national attention. Derek Johnson, a 34-year-old entrepreneur, had just arrived in the city for a business conference. Well-dressed in a tailored suit, he carried himself with quiet confidence. After checking in at the front desk, he sat in the lobby with his laptop, preparing for the next day's presentation. To the staff, he was just another guest. But to one police officer, Sergeant Mark Harlow, Derek was a suspicious presence. Harlow had a reputation in the city. Known for his aggressive style of policing, he often operated with little regard for community relations. When he entered the hotel lobby that night, his eyes immediately fixed on Derek. Without asking questions or confirming with staff, Harlow approached and demanded to know what Derek was doing there. Derek calmly explained that he was a paying guest, showing his room key and ID. Still, Harlow remained unconvinced. The confrontation escalated quickly. Harlow insisted Derek leave the lobby immediately, accusing him of loitering. Derek, maintaining composure, refused to move, reminding the officer that he had every right to sit in a hotel he was paying for. Guests in the lobby watched in discomfort as voices rose. Some recorded quietly on their phones, sensing the injustice playing out before them. When Derek stood his ground, Harlow decided to assert his authority more forcefully. He grabbed Derek's arm and tried to escort him out physically. Derek resisted, not with violence, but with words. "I'm not leaving. I have as much right to be here as anyone else." His voice carried across the marble walls, silencing the murmurs of onlookers. That's when fate intervened. Just as Harlow reached for his cuffs, Richard Coleman, the CEO of the entire hotel chain, walked into the lobby. Coleman, a distinguished man in his late 50s, was returning from a board meeting. He paused, stunned by the sight of one of his paying guests being manhandled in his own hotel. Approaching with measured calm, Coleman asked what was happening. Harlow snapped back, claiming Derek was trespassing and refusing to leave. Coleman listened carefully, then glanced at Derek, who held up his room key once more. After a beat of silence, Coleman uttered the sentence that changed everything. "Officer, the only person who doesn't belong here is you." The lobby erupted in whispers and gasps. Harlow's face turned crimson as he processed the humiliation. Derek straightened his posture, finally feeling vindicated. Coleman turned to the guests and staff, assuring them the hotel welcomed everyone with dignity. His words carried weight, not just because of his position, but because they publicly stripped Harlow of the power he had misused. What began as a routine evening had now transformed into a defining moment, one that would ripple far beyond the lobby of the Grand Metropolitan. The silence that followed Coleman's words was thick, heavy with tension. Every guest in the lobby felt it, the shift in power, the stunning reversal of authority. For once, it was not the officer dictating the outcome, but a civilian with influence, standing on the side of fairness. Sergeant Harlow, visibly shaken, tried to regain control. He barked out that Derek was causing a disturbance, and insisted he had the right to remove him. But Coleman remained calm, almost surgical with his tone. "This man is my guest," he said firmly, "and you will not treat him as anything less." The statement carried not just authority, but finality. The officer's eyes darted around the lobby, suddenly aware of the cameras pointed in his direction. Phones in nearly every guest's hands, recording every second. He had walked in assuming he could control the narrative. Now, with Coleman's intervention, that control was gone. Derek, still seated but no longer restrained, took a breath. For the first time in the encounter, he felt the tide turning in his favor. He had not only held his ground but had been publicly defended by one of the most powerful men in the city. Still, he kept his composure. "I told you," he said quietly to Harlow. "I belong here." Coleman instructed the front desk manager to confirm Derek's reservation on the spot. Within moments, the clerk pulled up the booking, verifying that Derek had indeed checked in hours earlier. Coleman then turned back to Harlow, his voice sharper now. "You've embarrassed my guest, my staff, and my establishment. I think your shift is over." The officer bristled, but the damage was irreversible. Guests began murmuring, some even clapping softly. The sight of a CEO standing up to a police officer was unusual, and the symbolism was powerful. In that instant, Derek wasn't just a businessman protecting his dignity. He had become a representative of countless others who had been silenced or removed without cause. Harlow, unwilling to admit defeat, muttered about just doing his job. Coleman, however, cut him off.
"No.
Your job is to protect, not to harass. Tonight you failed." The room buzzed with agreement, and for once the officer had no allies. Word spread quickly. Within an hour, clips of the incident began circulating online. The hashtag #GuestNotThreat trended locally by morning. News outlets picked up the story, replaying the moment when Coleman declared that the only person out of place was the officer himself. For Derek, the night had been exhausting, but he understood something larger was happening. What might have been dismissed as just another case of bias had been flipped on its head because someone with authority chose not to stay silent. Back in his suite later that evening, Derek received messages from strangers across the city thanking him for standing firm. One note in particular struck him. "You spoke for all of us who've been told we don't belong." He realized then that the confrontation in the lobby was not just his story. It was about the broader fight for dignity and respect. By the next morning, the confrontation had moved beyond the hotel lobby. It was the lead story on multiple news outlets. Clips of Coleman's words spread rapidly, shared thousands of times across social media. What struck people most was not only Derek's calm refusal to leave, but the way Coleman had stepped in and delivered a single sentence that cut through the officer's authority like a blade. For many, it wasn't just about a guest being harassed. It was about the symbolism. A black man in a luxury hotel lobby being told he didn't belong, only for the head of that very institution to declare that he did. In a society where countless individuals had been humiliated in similar ways, this moment resonated deeply. At the hotel, staff members whispered about what had happened. Some admitted they had been too nervous to intervene, worried about clashing with law enforcement. Others expressed relief that Coleman had arrived when he did. The CEO himself called an emergency staff meeting that morning, reminding everyone, "Every guest deserves dignity. If you ever see someone treated otherwise, you speak up. You don't wait for me to walk in." Meanwhile, Harlow faced a storm of backlash. His department was forced to release a statement acknowledging the incident, though they attempted to frame it as a misunderstanding. Few believed it. The video clearly showed an officer escalating without cause, ignoring both Derek's proof of his reservation and the calm explanations he gave. For Derek, the sudden attention was overwhelming. Interviews were requested, activists reached out, and his phone buzzed constantly with notifications. But he kept his focus on what mattered most, ensuring the story wasn't reduced to just another viral clip. In one interview, he explained, "This wasn't only about me. It's about every person who has been told they don't belong, simply because of how they look. I just happened to be in a place where someone powerful decided to speak up." That statement struck a chord. Civil rights groups amplified his words, connecting the incident to larger conversations about racial profiling and public spaces. They pointed out that while Derek had been vindicated thanks to Coleman's intervention, countless others had not been so fortunate. The pressure built quickly. City leaders called for an inquiry into Harlow's conduct, while the police union scrambled to defend him. But the images of Derek's calm dignity compared to Harlow's aggression were impossible to spin. Back at the Grand Metropolitan, guests who had witnessed the event checked out leaving glowing reviews, not of the rooms, but of the CEO's leadership. "A place that truly values its guests," one review read. Derek, too, received messages from strangers across the country, some sharing personal stories of similar humiliation. He read each one carefully, humbled by the connection. Still, he knew the story wasn't finished. Coleman's intervention had changed the narrative for that night, but the deeper issue, the assumption that someone like him didn't belong, was far from resolved. What had begun as a confrontation in a hotel lobby was quickly becoming part of a national conversation. The following week, the story reached its peak. Major television networks replayed the footage, commentators debated it, and editorials framed the incident as a turning point in how businesses could respond to bias in public spaces. What made the moment so compelling wasn't just the injustice itself, but the way it ended, with a CEO publicly choosing dignity over silence. Derek, though initially reluctant to step into the spotlight, soon realized he had been placed in a position to speak for many. Invitations poured in for him to attend community forums and corporate diversity panels. He didn't want to be seen as a victim, but as someone who had stood his ground and been affirmed. His message remained simple. Respect should not depend on your appearance. It should be the standard. Coleman, too, faced a wave of attention. He was praised for his decisive action, hailed as a model for corporate accountability. In interviews, he emphasized that he had not done anything extraordinary. "I didn't say what I said as a CEO," he explained. "I said it as a man who believes every guest, every human being, deserves respect. If I stayed silent, I'd be complicit." His humility only deepened the respect people felt for him. As for Harlow, the consequences finally caught up. Under mounting pressure, the department placed him on suspension pending investigation. Community leaders demanded his removal, pointing to his history of aggressive behavior. The video from the hotel lobby became Exhibit A in a broader case for reform. For once, the narrative didn't fade into obscurity, it forced accountability. Meanwhile, the Grand Metropolitan saw an unexpected outcome. Far from damaging its reputation, the hotel became a symbol of fairness and integrity. Bookings increased, guests wrote messages of appreciation, and employees said they felt proud to work under a leader who had the courage to act in the moment. Coleman used the momentum to launch a company-wide initiative focused on inclusion and sensitivity training, declaring, "Our hospitality must reflect not only luxury but humanity." For Derek, the most profound change came not from the media but from the people he met in the aftermath. At a community gathering, a teenage boy approached him and said, "When you didn't back down, I saw myself in you. Maybe next time, I won't back down either." That moment, more than any headline, convinced Derek that what happened in the lobby was bigger than him. Weeks later, as the frenzy began to settle, Derek returned to the Grand Metropolitan, not as a guest passing through, but as a speaker at an event hosted in the very lobby where everything had unfolded. Looking around at the chandeliers, the polished marble, and the crowd gathered to hear him speak, he felt the weight of the journey. "This space once tried to push me out," he told them. "But now we've reclaimed it, not just for me, but for anyone who has ever been told they don't belong." Applause filled the lobby. It was more than closure, it was transformation. What began as an attempt to strip a man of his dignity had ended in a collective reaffirmation of it. And though the incident would be remembered as the night a CEO's sentence ended it all, those who lived it knew the truth. It wasn't just the end of something unjust. It was the beginning of something better.